It's Metropolis. I did that because we don't have a theme song just yet.
You're working on that.
Exactly, I'm working on that. Thank you. I'm just workshopping something. Let me know in the comments how you like that. And if you didn't, keep that to yourself.
Or just tell them.
Say again?
Just tell them. Like, I freedom of expression. You know?
There you go. I don't believe in that here on this show. It is February 7th, 2024. Almost Lunar New Year. On today's episode, we have returning guest Niall Clapham Riccardo. Niall Clapham Riccardo holds degrees in sociology, political science, and law from UQAM. He is a member of Independent Jewish Voices and a trade union activist based in Mooniyang, Tiohtià, otherwise known as Montreal. My name is Kalden Rangdodatsampa. Today we have a very nice list of topics. We're going to have some good discussions. Before we get into them, Niall, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for asking me how I'm doing.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. I mean, your last appearance with Sarah from you both came as two representatives from IJV to talk about anti-Semitism in Montreal. I think we really enjoyed that. But today, you're not here representing IJV. You're here representing yourself.
I'm just here to talk.
You're just here to talk. You're just here to talk.
It's basically the conversation we have in your car.
Yes.
But now on the YouTube channel / podcast.
Yeah. And now I don't have a car.
You don't have that car. You don't have a car at all?
I don't have a car at all now.
Wow.
No, I'm using my mom's car.
I thought I was going to get a ride back with you.
Yeah, take the bus. That's what I did. You ever hear taking the BMW?
The BMW?
Bus Metro Walk.
Oh, yeah. Great show.
We got a great show tonight, folks. First topic, Niall. Montreal. So this is some news from Monday on February 5th, 2024. Can we get the slide, please? This is, I believe, our first slide. Here we go. So the headline reads, this was in the CTV by the Canadian Press. Montreal's largest housing building to combat homelessness inaugurated. So Monday, elected officials were in downtown Montreal Monday morning to take part in the inauguration in downtown Montreal of what is being described as the largest housing building dedicated to the fight against homelessness in Quebec. How big is this building? Some of you might be asking, as I was wondering myself. Well, this building is going to consist of 114 units, where 80% of the tenants will be benefiting from rent supplements, enabling them to pay 25% of their income towards housing. The Christine building, located on Christine Street between St. Catherine and René Lévesque, will provide nearly 100 people in vulnerable situations with access not only to housing, but also to on-site psychosocial support, said Quebec's minister responsible for social services, Lionel Carmant. They really there's nothing politicians love more than cutting ribbons. Now, what do you make of this? 114 new units to combat homelessness in Quebec, the largest housing building.
Well, I mean, obviously, like, it's good news in the sense that there's a building to house homeless people, and we're going through, like, you know, one of the worst crises. I don't even know if we can call this a crisis anymore. I mean, at this point, it's just like every year, every month, every day seems like it's worse.
It's all the same prolonged crisis,
and it's been going for, like, you know, we talk about housing recently, but it's been going on for I don't know how long, over a decade now. So obviously it's good news in the sense that, you know, it's a project that got off the ground, and we have 100 plus units for folks to be able to stay in when your government tells you that there's a new curfew and you're homeless and you can't stay outside.
Oh, I believe you were talking about the COVID curfew that the Legault government instituted during the pandemic.
Yeah, and they told everybody that homeless people were not exempt from it, and the reasoning behind that was that people were going to dress up as homeless people to be able to bypass the curfew laws, which obviously, I mean, you know, everybody thought about that, right? But it's just like, and it's funny, but it's not, because,
of course,
in the sense that, like, this is what this government's understanding of homeless issues is. Right? You know, it's people that are like, well, you know, homeless, like, literally, it's just like let's take a second to understand the magnitude of stupidity that goes into thinking that somebody who is homeless is able to seek refuge. When you're the government, you know that homeless, shelters were overflowing at that time, and you thought that it was okay. Like, yeah, homeless people just, they're going to find a place to stay. We don't have to give them an
8
exception.
p.m. Go somewhere.
Exactly. And this ties into this announcement, right, from the government, which is also, there's a nonprofit that's involved, which is like Bono, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And it kind of shows us like the duplessisme 2.0 from the CAC, which is this idea that the state has no role to play except facilitating PPP, or in this sense, private public partnerships, or in this sense, it's not even that public because you've got the city and then you've got a nonprofit. So this whole idea that the state has no role to play in even providing the housing. Like before, if we were talking the 1950s, 1960s, we would be, well, probably not with Duplessis, but I mean, 1970s, maybe with René Lévesque, we had systems that were put in place, the whole healthcare system, the idea that the Quebec healthcare system had to go into the neighborhood. So you had neighborhood clinics where people would have those services. You had, housing corporations, public entities that would be building housing on the federal level, like housing, kind of the housing corp. And so now this is where we're at, right? We're at private entities, quote unquote, non-public,
Sure.
right? Like they're not for profits, but they're not public entities either. They're receiving money publicly from public institutions. Most of the staff at the L'Accueil Bono and all of that, although being unionized, make a lot less than what government employees doing the same job they do made 20 years ago. So we're basically offloading this onto organizations that do not have the resources to do the job, and they also do not have the ability, right, to do it. So the city of Montreal doesn't have the ability. Like, yes, you can put piecemeal social programs in Montreal at public libraries here and there, but you can't put like an overbroad, general, overarching approach to homelessness, which is the role of the government of Quebec and the role of the Canadian government. So they come and they say, here, we cut a check. We're going to come and cut the ribbon at the inauguration. And at the same time, this government is, through Bill 31, basically creating more and more homeless people, right? Because they're going to get rid of what was basically la clause Françoise David, and they're going to get rid, which allowed folks to basically that were over 65 or 70, I forget the exact age, but you couldn't renovict. I think it's 70. You couldn't, I should know this. Anyways, whatever. That they shouldn't renovict. I'm saying that because at the bar exam, there was a question about this.
Yes. And Niall failed it.
And I failed it. By 5 points.
When was that also?
That was in January. It was first week of January.
Tough.
It's fresh. So there's something basically that makes it that you cannot evict without, there's several measures that have to be in place that are supposed to protect elderly folks, I think over 70, from renovictions basically. And if you there's a lot of dispositions or articles that would apply normally to developers to be able to renovate folks that don't apply to folks that would be over 70, right?
Some protections for the elderly.
Yeah, so they want to get rid of that, or they want to weaken them, and they also want to get rid of lease transfers. And lease transfers, it's funny because the minister obviously also said that, it was a way of gaming the system, where it's the system is gaming everybody, but apparently the people that are trying to prevent the system from gaming them are the ones gaming the system.
Of course. Yeah. You're oppressing me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the lease transfers is a way, is a mechanism basically to make sure that you're actually paying the rent within the realm of the percentage given by the tile every year, right? Because we all know, and anybody who lives in Quebec knows that if you go into a place on July 1st and you don't know what the person was paying before, you're probably paying a lot more than the percentage of increase that was allowed that year.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So that's the mechanism of lease transfers has been one of the reasons, and obviously not to the largest extent, but one of the mechanisms that has allowed Montreal and Quebec in general to weather a little bit like the rent crisis, the housing crisis compared to Ontario, BC, etc. And now they want to get rid of that, and we're already in a crisis right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. I guess you're saying the lease transfer was a little tool that tenants had to kind of
tool,
a very little tool in the toolkit that tenants had to whatever, like keep rents sort of in check. And now the CAC administration, the housing minister François Duranceau wants to get rid of it. I think broadly. So what you're talking about, I want to talk a bit more about the point you were making earlier about this government's approach. Not, of course, maybe not this government, but I guess government's approach, plural government's approach this time towards housing, towards these public institutions. I guess towards what I guess they think of their role is, where in the past they might have been, it's much more, let's say, like hands-on, where it's the government's like, okay, we want to provide housing for, like, let's say veterans and NDG, we're going to build like Benny Farms, we're going to have like, boom, this is like housing that's going to belong to them, that we're going to make, but then they get to live in it. Where now, I guess what you're saying, it feels like you're suggesting that you no longer have these institutions that would be the ones building the housing. Instead of hiring people who are like government employees who you have to pay a lot, now instead they kind of give the job to non-governmental entities, and every now and then cut them a check for like a small kind of like a small. It's like, of course, I will say, like, this is like a welcome like project, right? As we're saying, because it's like, of course, like any kind of like reprieve for people from the housing crisis, I think like a good thing. But then I feel like the issue is more so. And like I think the executive director of Accueil Bonan also said this, where it's like they're announcing this project in the Christine building that elected officials were at Monday. This is gonna provide housing for around 100 people in 114 units. The Quebec government was saying there's something like 300 or 400 more units in the pipeline, but the executive director of Carman was saying, yeah, but we need like thousands, right? I feel like that sort of ties into what you're saying about, like, you have these piecemeal approaches by, like, essentially like non-governmental entities that are doing the job of the government. And of course, they can't do the job of the government because they don't have the resources for it. They don't have the ability for it, like you were saying, which I kind of want to get into. I'm kind of curious what you mean about that. And you have these slow stoppages, maybe, no, not even stoppages. You have slowly addressing maybe some of the symptoms of the crisis of homelessness, of the crisis of housing in Quebec. But you have no kind of approach from the government to kind of even consider policies that kind of tackle the issue that causes homelessness or that causes the housing crisis. Because as you're saying, it's been in the works for like decades, and it seems like no one has that kind of long-term picture on this issue.
But so what creates homelessness, right? Like, what creates homelessness? So homeless people just appear?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously not, right? So it's public policy or lack thereof, or the state or public entities, governments deciding that we're not going to invest as much money in social housing. We're not going to build social housing anymore. We're not going to force developers to the table to create adequate housing. That creates homelessness, right? Homelessness doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? There's also like that intersection between mental health and homelessness, right? Where we saw, in Ontario in the 90s, but also in Quebec, and there could be a whole thing written about this, about, how mental health care services were the first to take cuts under neoliberalism,
of course,
right? And obviously neoliberalism creates a bigger mental health care crisis, and there's all of that is involved with that, and the Joker kind of talks about that, the movie, a little bit. But it's true, where he goes
you
to
see that,
the
you see
psychologist that. And we don't have any more money all of that. And the Joker's actually set in what was a laboratory in the United States for neoliberalism, which was New York in the 1980s.
In the 80s,
yeah. So there's that. There's the first decision, because nobody's going to complain about, folks that are living in mental institutions or publicly funded mental institutions or that were controlled by the state, right? Like literally regulated, controlled, etc. by the state.
No one's going to complain about them.
Nobody's going to complain about cuts to it.
Sure.
Nobody's going to complain about shutting down those institutions. And that's literally what they did. I mean, Ontario did it, Quebec did it, most of the provinces across Canada, most of the states in the United States did it. You could just go on and on and on. Maybe some places in Europe didn't do it, but, pretty much throughout the West, that's what it was. And then after that, you also have, subsequent thing, which is like now, well, where these people go, they're on the streets and they can't go anywhere because like rent is just completely crazy. And before you had mechanisms, which was basically, you had social housing. So people would go, basically to mental health care services, institutions, and then they would have, priority on housing wait lists, right? But we haven't built housing in the past 40 years, 50 years. So somebody who in the 80s, 90s got on a list might still be waiting in the 2000s, 2010s. And then you're talking about, 10 years of just waiting, paying ridiculous amounts of rent and on all of this. So all of these issues are connected, right? All of these issues are connected. And the idea that, governments can just, and you wanted to get into the whole question of what I meant by they don't have the ability, right? They don't have the ability. Legally speaking, Montreal can't legislate a lot in a lot of areas, right? Because they are an entity that basically the realm of possibility legally of action of the city of Montreal is determined by either, and in most cases, by the Quebec government,
right?
Most cases, and in some forms by the federal government too. So they can't really act, right? And there's been debate about this. Like cities should have more, a bigger realm of possibility to act in Canada. Seattle, for example, has a minimum wage, right? Like some cities in the United States have minimum wage. New York legislated on artificial intelligence,
right,
and the use of artificial intelligence. So within New York City, there is legislation on artificial intelligence. So that's like much further than anything Montreal could do.
I feel like some stuff I've heard from previous people who used to be borough mayors in Montreal. We're talking about like, because I would ask about like, what's it like administrating it? And this former borough mayor told me it's essentially like our hands are tied. We're like essentially she called themselves an administrative arm of the Quebec government.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's just like there's so many decisions that you can't really like enact yourself. The ones you can are like sort of like small scale things because it's like most things are just already like sort of have their own operation, right? With like snow plows or like potholes and stuff like that. And she was just trying to make that comparison where it's like we're kind of, now, I don't know if she was suggesting they're powerless, but I think I assumed that there was much more power. And then after talking to her, it was like, this picture started to form exactly what you're describing, right? Oh no, it's actually like cities in Canada, or at least in Quebec and Ontario, perhaps are like have much less municipal power than other cities like in America.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
I think it was Doug Ford, right, who like tried to campaign for like a more like municipal for like the Ontario government to like give municipalities more kind of
so that
power.
happened. There was that agreement between John Tory and Doug Ford, and then Olivia Chow became mayor, and he was probably not expecting that. So he's probably like kind of
expecting a certain kind of
right
mayor
now about that. But
I think even Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois of Quebec Solidaire was trying to position himself as a sort of like municipal friend as well. So it's interesting seeing this problem that you're describing starting to be like campaigned on in some on some provincial levels.
Yeah, and so there's two things. Like what you were talking, I was thinking about like the fact that there's a huge disconnect between on the progressive level. There's like all of these progressive, quote unquote progressive. Like we can dig into that. We can dig into that later. But
when you say that, I want you to look into the camera and say.
No, because I don't look people in the eye when I say mean things. So there's this progressive like front municipally, right? Like there's a bunch of like even small municipalities that elected like green mayors, etc. And there was even articles about that and all of that. But at the same time, at least here in Montreal. And I want to bring folks back a little, not too far back, but when there was the whole fiasco in Hochelaga about, I think it was at the start of COVID. I think it was like 2020, maybe autumn 2020, where it was decided that they were going to come with the police, the riot cops, and there was even horses, I think, in some pictures, to basically get rid of the homeless encampment, whatever there.
This tent city that was there,
the tent city, whatever term the media was using. And the way Valérie Plante and the Projet Montreal administration went about it was how they go about a lot of things. You know, it's like, we don't want to do this, but it is what it is. Like, we don't want to give the biggest increase to police in Montreal history, but we got that portfolio from Quebec, so we have to do it, right? We don't want to get rid of this encampment, but at the same time, like, we have no other, we can't go about it any other way because there's security concerns and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, they're concerned about fire safety.
Because there was like incident where, you know, absolutely. But the problem is the way they go about it, right? The police, like the intervention of the police. 2, the fact that, you know, maybe there should have been more muscled language from Valérie Plante, where I'm sure if you polled a lot of her supporters, her base, I'm not talking about, you know, people, suburbanites and stuff like that, you know, for them, homelessness doesn't exist and they just want to be in their Lexuses or whatever, you know, SUVs and like pass through Montreal. And it's like, oh my God, you know, Montreal's so dangerous. There's too many homeless people. But I'm talking about people that actually live in Montreal. And Projet Montreal's main base, like most people would say, that was not the way to go about that, you know?
The eviction of
the eviction, because even if the eviction, quote unquote, was necessary for security reasons, whatever, it's the fact that, you know, Valérie Plante could have gone down there and said, you know what? I'm not proceeding with an eviction until we have on the table concrete offers from the federal and provincial governments to make sure that in the next years, we're going to have housing, you know? We're going to have emergency housing. We're going to have whatever, you know? After the Second World War, Canada went on the biggest and most ambitious building of housing in history. You were talking about Benny Farm. You have a whole section on the map in Saint Laurent, which is called wartime housing, right? Yeah, whole section. Like, it's like, I don't know how many hectares or whatever, you know, of social housing. So quote unquote, for veterans, right? That was built. It wasn't built by, well, there was developers that were involved, but it was built by Canada Housing Corp, right? And so it's like public governments are coming to this fight with a spoon most of the time. It's a knife fight. You're coming with a spoon, and then you're complaining that you have a spoon, and that's all you have. You have a bazooka, like, right there waiting in the car, but you don't want to employ that. You don't want to use that because that would be really bad for the people that are coming with knives, which are the developers, which are the people that are profiting from this crisis. And there's a lot of them that are profiting from this crisis. And you're showing up with a spoon, and it seems like you're showing up with a spoon because you want to show up with a spoon at this point. You know?
I really like that image because it's like I think you paint this picture of like the kind of antagonist, or at least in this terms of like a fight, right? You have like the city, you have these like actors who are benefiting from this crisis, people who are engaged in battle against, at least. And what I like about this picture is like there's this. It's like the city and governments have this option, right, to use the bazooka, to actually come to this fight better prepared. But instead, they hold whatever sympathy for the assailants, for the other people, and they're like, oh, you know what, let me show up to the knife fight with a spoon instead of the actual thing that would help me win this fight, and that would actually secure more wins for like the public.
So like the city, again, going back to jurisdiction and stuff like that, the city doesn't have a lot of legal powers. Like, they don't have leverage necessarily legally to do a lot of things. They have
they have the leverage to evict a tent city, right?
But they have the leverage on a PR level to mobilize people that agree with these issues on these issues. And we haven't seen that from Projet Montreal. What we have seen from Projet Montreal, and this is like from... I was involved heavily in Projet Montreal in 2013. We had Jason Prince here from Concordia that was running for mayor of the Sud-Ouest. Jason Prince that wrote extensively about free transportation.
Great book.
And, there was even this article in the TE in BC about how, Projet Montreal was this great, agglomeration of so many different progressive elements and just people that came from so many different walks of life with so many different social issues. And you really felt, even under Bergeron, right, that this was kind of like this political startup, a little bit like the Greens in Germany when they started in the 1970s, which was like this rebellion, this kind of like, okay, we're going to use all of these urban issues to kind of like put emphasis on, we can have communities that are sustainable. We can have communities that fight against poverty. We can have communities that fight against discrimination, all of this, And so that 2013 campaign, although Bergeron was a absolutely terrible leader and actually held a lot of right-wing views, notably the fact that he said in the debate that he was going to put all of the homeless people in buses and ship them out of Montreal.
That's not okay.
And that's why he went and joined Tiohtià after. But there was that kind of like feel to it, right? 2017, I think there was a feel to it too, where Valérie was the underdog fighting against Coderre. It was like, what Montreal is really wanting.
This big ambitious project, right?
Exactly. We're going to do blue bonnets. We're going to build all this social housing blue bonnets. We're going to say no.
The old racetrack.
The old racetrack in Côte-des-Neiges and DG. We're going to basically say no to the baseball stadium. Evenco had came out that year, right? Where like half of, and it's funny because now there's the casino announcement, whatever. But like Evenco came out that year in that election, and there was the electric formula,
the FE.
And all of these things where it's like, oh, our city's being taken over by corporations, then Nicolas only cares about corporations. And so obviously, I'm not going to say that Projet Montreal is as bad as the Nicolas because that's really difficult to match. But it does seem that anytime you talk about an issue with people from Projet Montreal that defend the record, they get into technocratic discourse about stuff. It's like, oh no, but you don't understand the operational budget of the city. Oh no, but you don't understand this. Oh no, but you don't understand the legalese behind all of that. And so, we elected a movement that became a technocratic government that basically sidelined what was the most important part of Projet Montreal, which was the political movement aspect of it,
Yeah. I think going back to what you were saying before about was it the eviction of the homeless encampment in Hochelaga, because I believe that's on city property too, right? And you're saying you're I think there's what happened, which was the firefighters came in, police came in, they cordoned off the area, and they just kind of like tore down the tents and kind of like apparently like, there was some level of like, no, it was kind of done like we gave them advance warnings, it was kind of like something that they knew was kind of going to happen, and there was some level of like whatever like I guess. I don't know what to call it, like patience from like some social workers who were extended to them. But then I think I really like this alternative version of that you're painting, where it's like, no, you could have that could have been an opportunity to kind of be like, hey, like this is like a real symptom of this larger crisis, and instead of using force muscle against the people who are victims of this crisis, let's use this as a rallying cry against like federal governments or provincial governments to try and get like more for them right there, rather than just kind of coalescing to these forces that want these people kind of out of there.
It's like, I really wonder sometimes, and I have like a really good friend who's a doctor in the army, so he's going to hate me for this, but like, I really wonder what the Canadian Army does sometimes. Like, I'm at loss to like why there's this, and I know it's people in the army will be like, there's not enough money, whatever, but too much for me, for what I see them doing. Yeah. But it's like, if Valérie Plante went down and said, okay, like, we need housing now. And we have this space, and we're going to build housing so that's secure, whatever. Like, why didn't they put the army to work?
Sure, like a sort of a civil, like engineer corps kind of.
The engineer corps, like even with regards to like the water, and I'm not even going to get into the whole First Nation stuff, but like, what do we consider as a crisis?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so everybody's talking about a crisis. We've been talking about a crisis of homelessness, of housing for years, and we're doing nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the city is. So, I mean, I think this is a good segue to the next slide, please. So, this is, I guess, one of the, how do we say, solutions or attempts to. He's laughing. Solutions or attempts towards curbing the housing crisis that the city administration set up. So there was a new house. There was a 2 years ago. There was a housing bylaw. Valérie Plante's administration said this bylaw would lead to the construction of 600 new social housing units per year. This was
and the number is
0 because all the developers, because the bylaw, there's no muscle to the bylaw. There's nothing about the bylaw that forces people to do it. Forces developers rather to like construct social affordable housing. Instead, it's like you either build the affordable housing or you pay like a fee. Every developer chose to pay a fee. Then some people might say, oh, like with the fees raised, maybe you can like build something, out of that. It's 24.5 million raised. Most critics say this is far. I mean, as much as that's a very large number. I would love to have that amount, but in terms of like tackling a housing crisis, I would go to the casino with that amount. I would stay at the hotel casino.
Please don't.
I will not be doing that. That money is that 24.5 million raised from those fees is hardly enough to tackle the crisis. It's hardly enough on a governmental level as well to even build something impactful that would kind of curb the crisis. Plante defended the bylaw. She argued that developers would be more likely to build social housing if the Quebec government was willing to provide any money to support projects, something it has not done. Yeah, so I mean this ties into what you're saying before about how like you have this municipal government that says their hands are kind of tied, and then I think this is a good example of showing up with a spoon, right? Where it's like,
I mean, it's showing up with a spoon. I don't think that there's a lot necessarily that the city can necessarily do in the sense that I don't know like. Could they impose what could they actually impose as kind of on developers if developers didn't respect stuff? I don't know to what extent they have that coercive capacity to coerce them into doing it. Obviously. And with this being said, we get back into what like we were talking about before, which is okay, but it seems like we've been playing nice with developers and we've been playing nice with the folks that have been profiting off of a crisis, which by the way, if you're profiting off of a crisis, you don't want the crisis to end.
No, right, exactly.
So like you're asking people to help you end a crisis that they're profiting on. Like there's a problem. Like if I'm profiting off of a crisis and you're asking me to help me profit off of a crisis, it's like somebody who started a fire, the firemen or fire people asking somebody who started a fire to help them put out the fire. Sure. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's like it's basically that, right? And so the city is taking this approach, which is like, and I'll go back to like Yanis Varoufakis when he talks about anything in politics. You can't just have plan A, because when plan A is done, so for example, now this was plan A, this was the big announcement, this is what was going to build 600 units of housing per year in Montreal, of social housing per year in Montreal, or affordable housing, and it hasn't. What's plan B? Like, how do we move towards that goal knowing that this mechanism hasn't worked? Is it fining developers? Is it saying basically that, developers will not be able to build if they don't build, a certain amount of housing in every project? Like projects won't be approved, just straight up won't be approved by the city if you don't have this. It's not about putting money in a slush fund. It's about just not approving housing projects from developers that do not agree to the minimum of 20%. And it was supposed to be 20-20, right? It was supposed to be 20 affordable and 20 social. And so like the difference between the two is also that affordable, like the definition of affordable is very loose.
I think in Vancouver, they tried to define affordable as something like $2,000 a month.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. We all have that to spend on rent. But like, so that's the thing, right? Like, what is plan B? And so if you go to Projet Montreal, they'll probably tell you, well, plan B is not for us to decide, it's for the provincial and federal governments. And the big problem is the provincial and the federal governments. But it's kind of like, so it's funny, right? Because like I think people are really upset with issues of affordability right now, and a lot of people obviously are upset with housing, and so they're upset with Valérie Plante because they're like, Valérie Plante is not doing enough with housing, and the housing jurisdiction is within the municipal realm, and so I'm pissed at the person that could actually make it happen. And Valérie Plante says all the time, well, I can't make it happen. But then she doesn't say who can make it happen, or she doesn't actually spell it out. It's like, we haven't received an envelope from the Quebec government. They received an envelope apparently this year, I think, in the biggest envelope they ever received for police from the Quebec government. And how about they said, well, we don't want this money for police because it's not a priority. Our priority is housing. We want that money for housing. You know?
They're playing along.
Well, it just seems like it's this dance, right? It's this dance on three levels of government. In other jurisdictions, like mostly throughout the world, you have municipal parties that are affiliated with provincial parties that are affiliated with federal parties.
Sure, you have like a sort of,
you know?
Sure.
So it's like you're not going to play ball in the United States with the Republicans. And you can talk about how polarized and polarizing that is. But at the same time, here, it seems like the municipal governments want to be able to receive the goodies from the provincial government so they won't criticize the provincial government. And then the federal government, you know, like they play off the federal government and the provincial government, and sometimes they receive stuff from the federal government. And if they're nice with the federal government, they're going to, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's like this dance where it's just like, that's
constantly
not,
deflecting kind of blame or...
And it's like, this is not what people want. And I think the frustration, and I mean, democracy is now a joke in the sense that like municipal democracy, like what is the percentage of participation?
No, it's so low. It's like I believe it's like less than like 50%.
Exactly. In Ontario, last election was like almost one Ontarian out of two didn't go to the polls.
Yeah.
And in Quebec, like it wasn't that much better. The last federal election, atrocious.
Of course.
Like that because now we have these three levels of government that are just like, you don't find who could actually do anything. And everybody's saying, well, I can't do anything. It's the other person. And so people just don't want to vote. And I understand, you know?
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the premier, Legault. This week, Quebec Solidaire co-spokesperson Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois asked a question to the premier. This is just a general translation of what he said. He said, so I challenge the Prime Minister, the Premier today, to answer my question without scapegoating. My question is simple. In light of the figures revealed yesterday, does the Premier regret having denied the existence of a housing crisis during his first mandate? Legault's immediate response was, well, I believe we've gone up to 300,000 temporary migrants this year. So he's trying to, I guess, put the blame immediately. It's funny because he's like, I don't want you to scapegoat this. So like, tell me about like whether you regret. And he's like, I'm going to scapegoat. Where he talks about and the other.
I mean that's his modus operandi.
Of course,
like that's what he does all the time.
Yeah.
It's part of it. It's second nature.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's all he knows. It's the only language he knows. So essentially, right now, he's blaming the increase of temporary immigrants in Quebec to the housing crisis. I think you also saw this with. I think Duranceau said something very similar where.
On PSPP.
And of course. I mean, that's just the whole. That's the playbook, right?
Yeah.
Where they're blaming.
And Poiliev, and you know.
Of course. I guess I want to ask you, what do you make of this?
It's crazy, right? And I'm going to go back to Poiliev just for a second because he made that, and seriously, like in terms of PR, it was like a crazy video, right? Where he was like the Big Short, like that movie, like he kind of goes and he like explains all of these like, you know, and it's like, if you don't understand that the reason behind the crisis in housing is that we are using housing as a market for profit, which makes that housing is a commodity, and commodities become more value, like you add more value to commodities if it becomes more scarce, right? So why would you have an incentive to build housing if you can just sit on it and it's going to go up in value, right? And that's what we've seen, right? A whole generation of people have become, their retirement plan was buying a house. They bought a house at $40K, and now it's 350, 400, sometimes 500. In Vancouver, it's maybe even $1 million.
Of course,
right? Yeah. You know, so it's like we're here and we're talking about everything, and now we're in this huge, like, you know, oh well, we accepted 300,000 temporary residents, and we don't have enough. Space for them. Temporary residents, okay. Like it's important to go to that whole like temporary residence like aspect of things. They're foreign temporary workers most of the time, right? Foreign temporary workers where they basically are not workers that we're getting with the slides.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure we have the right slide matches up. Yeah, that's fine. That's a good one. Thank you.
So yeah, and the vacancy rates are ridiculous. I mean, we have vacancy rates in Gaspésie that are like ridiculous, like 2% or whatever. That's not Montreal. So, and as Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois was saying, there's not a lot of immigrants in Gaspésie. But that's the thing, right? It's like we don't have. So we've been trying with the market to incentivize, right, developers into building. They don't want to build because of what I said, of scarcity, of, it's become a commodity, it's become a portfolio, it's become, a stock that you have in your portfolio that will go up with time. Like that's one of the things that somebody said during COVID. They were like the best investment, any investment on the stock market in COVID went down. People lost, now they made it back if they kept those stocks, but they lost they were wiped out. Millions, hundreds of millions, trillions of dollars were wiped out during COVID, except on housing. Housing went up. Housing went up because you can force somebody legally to pay you rent. It's an investment, but you have a return on that investment that's enforceable legally, which is called rent, right? You don't have stocks that are dividends on stocks and stuff like that. You can't enforce that legally. Actually, legally, it's up to, in most cases, some cases different, but it's up to, and it depends on the contracts for certain stuff, but it depends on the corporation to give you a dividend or not, right? Rent is not like that, right? And so somebody said, it's crazy that landlords, think that they can just have a return that will never, ever be altered. But that's what they have.
Right.
Today, you have a percentage that goes up every year, whether you make repairs. If you make repairs, it's even more. So you have a return that is like, so why would you build more housing? To do what?
Right.
Why would you take that risk when you don't want to take that risk in the first place? You can just sit on your asset, and your asset's going to go up in terms of value, in terms of a rent that's always coming back. And that's where, this fiction of the market doesn't work. That's why you need public entities that come in and to break up monopoly situations. This is not something that comes from Marx. This is something that comes from Adam Smith. They're supposed to be the father of modern liberal capitalism. And then you have the whole immigrant situation, right? Which is crazy, right? Because the people that are making money off of investments in housing are people like Legault and most of his ministers that are landlords
or real estate.
Right?
I mean, like
Dugon
also got into trouble because she was giving special like fast access deals to like her like business partner who's in real estate,
which is absolutely conflict of interest, absolutely ridiculous. But that's it, right? You imagine the person that is supposed to be resolving the situation has a direct interest in the situation, the problem not being resolved, is the Minister of Housing, So, like, but to come back to this issue of immigration, which is really, really important right now because everybody is using this as like,
a scapegoat,
but also like political football and stuff like that. Like, okay, how is it that folks, like, immigration has always existed in Canada? 1, 2, immigration numbers, yes, have gone up, but significantly gone up. I don't actually, the numbers are not there to say that it was a significant increase. What did go up, though, was all of the money that was funneled into medium, small, and obviously big businesses, multinational, giant corporations during COVID. And if you have a lot of money sitting there, you don't want it to be inactive. You invest it. What are you going to invest it in? Real estate. It's the best return.
Safest one, like you were saying.
It's the best return.
Yeah. It's guaranteed returns, protected by law.
Exactly. So if that money is going into real estate, obviously real estate values are going to go up. Obviously rent is going to go up. And obviously you have no incentive to build because if you build, you're bringing the value down. Right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that it's not. I'll say it's not only the Legault government that plays into this, right? It's like I feel like Trudeau also plays into this when there's just like talks about like especially when people frame the conversation around the housing crisis in terms of like, oh, there's too many like foreign buyers, right? Where I think just this week, like there was like, I think there's like an article in like it's the Atlantic or the Guardian about how Trudeau is making it so like British expats can buy houses here, right? And there's this framing of like, and not in the way of it's kind of similar to the immigrant thing where it's like you have people who are citizens and you have the people who are foreign who are coming here and they're the reason that the prices are going up, right? Where it's like, oh, it's because they're making the supply so much smaller because of their presence. But it's like I think you saw this in like Vancouver as well, right? Where you had some kind of
Oh yeah, the whole thing with Hong Kong, right?
Of course. So it's the idea that it's like Chinese money that's kind of doing this.
But the fact of the matter in that is that they allowed that to happen, and a lot of people profited off of that because it was money that China wanted to get back. Because for the longest time, Hong Kong was a money laundering capital in China, right? And then through the casinos, what they did is they opened casinos and they started laundering the money, right? And then that money went into the housing market in Vancouver. So it's like, and that was all public, by the way. That was the BC Liberals were 100. They're not called Liberals anymore, probably because of that scandal. Because like the name's tainted.
They don't do too
now
well.
They're United, they're whatever they're called. But it's crazy, right? And we're talking about golden visas. Canada was the first country with Australia, I think, in the world to go about golden visas, which was basically you pay a certain amount of money and you have Canadian residency and you can buy property in Canada.
Oh, sure,
right,
sure.
So when we're talking about foreign investors, like. We have corporations that are foreign investors. We have individuals that are foreign investors. But it's not temporary residents. It's not the people that are coming, like, for economic reasons for a better future for their family in Canada. This is ridiculous. You know what I mean? And it's like, I mean, I don't even want to look at like how much property probably these folks like in our political class have abroad. So when we're talking about foreign, there's a class of foreign investors in the world, and that's probably the 1% of all of the world's population, even probably less, that own property. Most people in this country can't afford property in this country. And
so these kinds of laws, I feel like they're not about protecting some general population from foreign buyers. They're about protecting the people who have the money to buy property here from other people who can. It's like reducing the competition, right?
100%.
Yeah, and that's usually kind of like the concern of like nationalists, where it's like they're worried about big money, international players coming and like disrupting their own like little like ecosystem of like the market here, right?
But also, we're not talking about corporations.
We are
like
not
what we know
you're right.
is that there are investment-based housing corporations that literally all they do is be hedge funds for huge investors.
Yes.
They bought up Detroit. They bought up San Francisco. They bought up anywhere they thought were gentrification, etc. They literally go in 2008, after the 2008 crisis, and nobody talks about that. But, you were buying $20 blocks in Detroit for nothing, right? And these corporations, they saw an opportunity in that because they're like vulture funds basically for housing. And there are some of the corporations that just in the Centre Sud, right next to Burrow, they bought up a lot of space. I have a friend who was reno evicted by somebody who had their corporation in New York, and then they have a shell corporation in Canada so that they respect quote unquote Canadian law or Quebec law, right?
I'm trying to find. I can't find it. There's something. I mean, I wanted to add London, Ontario to that list of cities as well because I think it was found that there was like a huge percentage of single-family homes in London, Ontario that was just owned by one company, right? And you saw this during the pandemic of them just like swooping up for exactly the reasons you're saying, right? Where it's like with these, when you get a house, when you get to own a house, you have like a guaranteed kind of income from it. I mean, of course, if that's if people are willing to pay the price. I'm gonna switch our topic now.
Like just before the switching, how immoral is it that you have a corporation that is essentially only about holding houses? Like, how immoral, It's like, okay, in Canada, we accepted that healthcare should not be private. Like, we shouldn't have private healthcare corporations. Maybe we should start thinking about not having private housing corporations that they're only there to hold houses.
Right.
That's it.
Right. That these companies exist to make profit off something that should be a right, like shelter.
Exactly.
Yeah. You talked about casinos in Hong Kong. I want to talk about a casino in Montreal. Can we switch to the casino slide,
it's
please?
less exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've been to this casino. So the Montreal casino.
I've been once, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get in. I think I didn't have my ID or something.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, maybe.
How old were you?
I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't get in. I had a beard at the time.
You had a beard at the time too. Yeah, I would have let you in.
I know.
I'm gonna let you right in. I'm like, take my money. Start go to the slots.
Bet you would let me in a lot of places.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, that's just,
places I shouldn't be.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that's I will say that's not you. That's just me. I just can't be like I can't care. I'll just be like, yeah, whatever, go in. I let everyone into whatever business I'm in charge of.
Be careful.
So yeah, Montreal has a nice little casino owned by Loto Quebec, our state lottery corporation, Crown Corporation. The building, which used to be, I think, the French Pavilion during Expo 67, they turned it into a casino.
Of course, it was a French one.
No comment. The building, just recently, there's news from Law Quebec. They are planning to open up a hotel right next to the casino. So this hotel would be a low-profile building of roughly 4 stories that will sit on top of the casino's underground parking facilities next to the casino. This project has received a bit of criticism from independent city councillor Craig Sauvé. Craig Sauvé described it as a completely unacceptable commodification of public space. Valérie Plante, in defense of the project, said this hotel is not eating up any green spaces. It's being built on the existing infrastructure of the casino. The height of the hotel will be limited to preserve views and respect the environment of the park itself. It's a hotel on a human scale.
Great. That's what we need.
Yeah, we on human scale hotels. Niall, are you excited about this project? Are you going to be staying?
These leftists, they don't even want hotels anymore. Like millennials are canceling everything. You know what I mean? Like hotels too. It's
millennials aren't
crazy.
They're not buying diamonds,
toilet paper.
Yeah, they're not buying diamonds. They're busy buying lattes, avocado toast, and not going to the hotel casino.
And not going to hotels. Like what a generation! Like it's unacceptable. You know?
Do you think if you went to the hotel and you were blocked from going there, would you have gone to the... No, sorry. If you try... I'm going to rephrase that. If you tried going to the casino back then and you were blocked for some reason, even though...
Well, now I can just go to the hotel.
No, you can just go to the hotel.
Like, do you think they're going to block me if I'm staying at the hotel?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not. You can probably just get a drink.
I could just go get my ID at the hotel.
You know, this segment, I was going to be very excited about talking about why maybe this should not be built, but now I just want to go to the hotel.
You want to go to the hotel?
No, I'm just joking. I'm playing around.
Do you think you have money to go to that hotel? I just want to see what the night at the hotel.
I can ask for a glass of water at the bar.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
I wear my Village de Valeur suit. I go to the bar and I'm like, give me
because for sure, I mean, this hotel is for Montrealers in general. It's like Montrealers that want to get out of the city. There's going to be a little bit of a
let's get out of town.
Let's go.
Let's go over the bridge halfway.
Let's go over the bridge halfway and stay at the hotel there next to casino. That's absolutely what we want to do.
So this hotel is it's not Loto Quebec's first. They have 2 other hotels in their real estate portfolio, which they're trying to grow. I think for reasons similar to what we were saying before. Of course, real estate is a very hot commodity, a little too hot if you ask me. They have the Lac Lémy Hotel Casino in Gatineau, and now they're building this. The Lac Lémy one is actually like massive. It's like a real like tower, and I guess this one is like. I feel like Valérie Plante is trying to be like, you know, it's not this big ugly tower. It's going to be like there's going to be some grass on the roof.
It encapsulates perfectly like Projet Montreal's approach to a lot of stuff. It's
tell me.
Well, on several levels. It's like it's a hotel and that screams corporatism, but it's okay because we're going to put a roof garden on top of it. And maybe Lufa Farms, who have terrible business practices. I don't know if you saw that. With union busting and stuff like that. They're going to be able to have a green garden on top of the hotel.
Nice.
So it's actually going to be... And there's going to be a bike path.
Of course.
To the hotel. Okay?
I love biking on my way to gambling.
Full bike path on the way to the hotel. And yeah, you know, like it's not going to take up existing green space, but we're not going to add green space to it, except, of course, you know, the garden roof.
Of course.
And yes, there's going to be a bylaw that's going to make it that the millionaires that are coming for Formula One cannot use their private jets or helicopters to land on top of the hotel. But if the millionaires do want to land a helicopter on top of the hotel.
It's got to be a green helicopter.
It's got to be a green helicopter, absolutely. And they have to come by Tesla.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
this. No, but seriously, this encapsulates like so many things about Projet Montreal's approach, which is one. It kind of like when they got the criticism, their answer was like, "Well, we had to do it because it's like it's just like, what are you going to say? What are you going to say?
Yeah.
No, like what? No, you could just say no. Like you could say if you can make an underground parking lot, right? Because they're make an underground parking lot and open up that space to the public.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why should we? And we were talking about Eventco before. I mean, they completely destroyed that whole section where Picnic Electronique used to be, right? Where there was that monument and stuff like that. And they created it into this huge, like, festival place for, all of Eventco's, like, summer
Hochelaga
events and stuff like
MTL.
that. Exactly, And it's like, you could have just done that in a way with a lot of public money, by the way. I would like to see how much public money is going into this too, because I mean, we didn't really talk about it, and they make it seem like it's the casino in Loto Quebec that is just doing this, but there's going to be money directly or indirectly, like in tax cuts, through like, because they did the Green Garden, the Green Garden. So they're going to pay $10 million less in taxes this year because
some kind of subsidies for that.
The CO2 that the two people, the amounts of two people that they're going of CO2 emissions that they're going to retain in that garden is worth $10 million.
And I will say it's also like, I mean, a lot of Quebec money is kind of public money, right? Because they make it off of like whatever, like any kind of like.
Well, I mean, Little Quebec is people that are buying like literally like that are
Lotto
gambling or whatever.
Yeah,
so it's basically a tax, but it's like
they're
we
just
don't
funding this little hotel.
Exactly, for millionaires, for F1. But also like, that's the approach, right? It's like, so we could have done something else, and we decided to commodify it, and we decided to give it to a private corporation when it's like, maybe we should be thinking about any opportunity to bring stuff back into the public domain and to give access to most, like if we wanted this whole idea of Projet Montreal at the start was to make public space more democratic, right? Like you want to, extend the realm of democracy to every space in the city. And so, bike paths were part of it, making the city more walkable, all of that, all stuff we agree with. But we have to go the extra mile. We have to go the extra mile and actually think about how do you take corporations or this like for-profit mentality out of the city. And I think Projet Montreal thinks that we can keep that tension, right? Which is make the city more affordable, make the city more walkable, more livable, and at the same time, give the keys to corporations. Here it's a public entity, which is Loto Quebec, which is like, private, public, whatever corporation, but still.
It's not quite like a public interest project, though.
Exactly.
Right?
It's
like
for profit.
It's a for-profit interest project. It's for, let's say, like people who would want to be right next to a casino, people who would want to be on Notre Dame, and like you're saying, right? It's precisely either for people who want proximity to these festivals that happen in the summer, including F1, right? It's not quite like F1. I don't think of F1 as like a people's sport,
No, for sure not. I mean,
it draws a certain kind of crowd.
We've also seen reports saying that F1 doesn't actually bring a lot to the city, except sex trafficking, all of these like a lot of crime actually related, and and then we talk about protests or whatever as them being like the worst. But the idea that F1 is not necessarily beneficial for the city, and it's just beneficial for this, like, again, 1% elite that decides to travel throughout the world, and
Yeah, this seems to kind of it sets up a nicer cushion for them,
Exactly.
rather than anything for a public good. I want to move on to our next topic. Oh, we'll go back to that actually. We have a little picture of a little.
That's
rendering.
what it's going to be. You've got the green garden, the loofah green garden,
So
like
for
on top.
hold on, I need to try and move my way with the microphone. So for our listeners, right now we're looking at a picture of like an artist rendering of what the casino hotel might look like, and it's like, I don't know, like a first year architect student like idea of like a cool place. It's like, it's very low key, It's like the casino is still the highest thing in on the island. It's just sort of surrounded by this like low key, very like low profile, flat hotel. You can barely tell there's a hotel there. I look at that, I'm like, oh, that looks like whatever, like some kind of really complicated like public park. But no, it's actually going to be a hotel.
That's the beauty of it. It's like it looks like it's public, but then you get there and they're like, no, sorry, this is only for millionaires. Like, how did you come here by private jet? Or?
Me today?
No, I'm talking about the people.
No, sorry.
In the hotel. If you didn't come by private jet, you can't. You know.
I can't go there.
No, you can't.
Oh damn!
You can go to the casino.
I took the BMW
if you have your
today.
ID.
I took the BMW today.
Okay, you're gonna make that joke again.
The bus metro walk. What's the next slide? Yeah, so that's another quote by Valerie Plante. We can go to the next one. It's great that I remembered all these slides.
Yeah. Wow.
Next slide, please.
Oh my God. Yeah. The breaking point.
Yes, I guess this ties into a bit what we were saying before about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I put that in the wrong section. But anyways, Quebec, Legault writes to Trudeau, and he's like, "Dear Trudeau," not actually, but like, I mean, not actually, he didn't say these following words, but he's essentially saying, the excessive number of asylum seekers is causing Quebec to be at a breaking point. This kind of speaks to what we were saying before about the kind of.
Did you see today that they're gonna now Pierre Paul Saint-Plamont
Paul Saint-Pierre,
Paul PSPP, whatever.
PSPP, the leader of the Parti Québécois.
It's too long and it's useless. He's useless. They want a referendum. They want a referendum on immigration. So now in Quebec, we're finally getting a referendum. 30 odd years after 1995, but not about sovereignty.
No.
About if we like immigrants or not.
Yeah.
Knowing that the majority of those people voting in a referendum, crushing majority, nobody's Indigenous.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of immigrants. But don't say that too loud.
Not,
okay?
Not.
Like we want to have our referendum about how racist we are. Okay? That's all right.
All right, yeah, well, we're a little short on time, so let's go to the next slide, please. Here we are. All right, so this is an older article, but I dug this up because I kind of had a feeling this conversation would go this way, talking about I think we talk about like technocrats, we're talking about this kind of like progressive sort of like I think tech companies a lot of times call themselves progressive, and there's this idea that they serve some kind of grand process of like technology of like they're doing this work to like make our tools better, make kind of life more convenient.
That's
for
salvation.
us.
Salvation through tech.
Salvation through tech. Hallelujah.
Exactly. That's like all of the problems in the world are gonna be resolved.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know?
So I brought this up because I think you had some things you wanted to say about entrepreneurial leftism. So here we have we're looking at this article. This is published back in 2018. Amazon, Philippe Couillard, and Valérie Plante disappointed that Montreal's candidacy was rejected. So this is back in 20.
Candidacy for what though?
That's what I'm saying. It's candidacy. So Montreal in 2018 wanted to be a candidate to become Amazon's next headquarters city. This was a really interesting process. Interesting usually for the worst ways. It was kind of like they had this like almost like a bidding.
It's like a talent show.
It's like a talent show. It's like a talent show.
Like show us how much tax dollars you can give us.
Yeah, except
in public money.
Except the judge is just like a terrible person.
Yeah, the judge was literally like Mr. Barnes in The Simpsons.
Yeah, Mr. Burns, exactly. Yeah, it's like Montreal's trying. Here you have a current mayor, Valérie Plante, I believe in her first mandate. Philippe Couillard, the then premier, both expressing disappointment that Montreal did not make the final cut for Amazon's new headquarters city. So yeah, Amazon was getting cities to pitch to become the next headquarters city. You had like tons of cities around the world like pitching. It was literally like the Olympics, right?
Yeah, there was like New York. There was like San Francisco. I don't know. There was like a bunch of cities.
Toronto, Vancouver, Halifax.
Toronto, that's true. Yeah.
Sault Ste. Marie even put in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. That's
little Sault Ste. Marie.
Putting Sault Ste. Marie on the map. You know?
Yeah.
Like
the Sioux.
Evil Corp.
Yeah, literally.
But that's back in the day when Amazon was hype. You know, like before we realized that the workers were pissing in bottles and during their shifts because they couldn't.
Coming out then, no?
Yeah, we weren't there yet.
No,
we
but more people know
we
it
were
now.
like, oh, Amazon, like, you know.
Yeah.
It was only like a bunch of like crazy leftists like us that were like, oh, Amazon is not, you know.
Hey guys, maybe we should not be letting workers piss in bottles and be completely stressed at work. I mean, Amazon notorious for just how they treat workers. Tons of Amazon locations trying to unionize. Yeah, the first one in Staten Island last year that was able to unionize.
Yeah.
I believe there's a current driver, the Montreal one. There's attempts at the Alberta one, Mississippi, Alabama. That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, I mean the way they have their system set up. Like how do you think people can? How do you think a company can do same day delivery?
How do I think they can do same day delivery? With temporary foreign workers.
Yeah, there you go. Temporary foreign workers, incredibly strict efficiency, like whatever like rates that you have to be hitting with the number of packages you're like packing and shipping, and of course that's going to lead to injury. There's an incredible amount of injuries at these Amazon warehouses, and here we have Montreal being like, oh please, let Montrealers be the ones who are getting injuries.
Not just that, let's just like gentrify the whole city and turn it into,
This is true because this is not necessarily just for a warehouse where those kinds of injuries happen.
No,
this
is for
the
smart city.
Yeah, the smart city. The smart city. So now, what do you think about these kinds of smart cities? What do you think about when municipalities try to court these tech companies? Because Montreal has, to some success, done that before, right? That's how we got Ubisoft here. Yeah, go ahead. I passed.
So this is the point of the conversation where you brought me to this point so that my political career or whatever I had aspired to at one point, maybe perhaps, is over.
You filled the bar
because now it's going to be like entrepreneurial leftism. We're using all of these big words, and then from that point on, it's like, yeah, no, sorry, like you can't, like, you're not down with corporate Canada or corporate America. Like we're okay with socialism up until a point. Like
yeah.
You're sounding a lot like Robespierre and Lenin right now. So like
both of them,
you got to chill. Mix, but like. It's Rosa Luxemburg. You're just gonna throw them all out.
Yeah, just start saying names.
Just start saying names. Yeah. I'm not gonna answer the questions like that. I'm gonna get off the hook.
You know what David Graeber had to say about this? You know what that other guy.
You're mumbling.
You started this. We're just name dropping leftists now.
So I was talking to you about this because it's kind of, the casino reminded me of this. Mm-hmm. And it's probably a skeleton in Projet Montreal's closet that nobody really wants to come out anymore, especially since Chris Smalls and the whole team in Staten Island exposed to what extent Amazon is just like the worst corporation ever, and that Jeff Bezos decided that he was going to become a supervillain with Elon Musk and have that competition of who has the bigger rocket. And now everybody's like, we are not, these are not people we should be looking up to, the gods of capitalism, or late capitalism. But this is kind of like the approach that you have with Projet Montreal, which is, so we're talking about housing and we're talking about homelessness. And one of the cities that actually resembles Montreal to a certain extent, San Francisco in many ways, with a big university hub. Mm-hmm. I think Montreal is actually bigger, but I mean, obviously, Stanford, and you have like a bunch of other universities there. Silicon Valley kind of like comes out of that ecosystem, publicly funded, like almost 100% publicly funded. And a city that was super progressive, right? San Francisco was known as this beacon of progressivism. You had Harvey Milk. A lot of the fight for queer rights starts in San Francisco in the United States, but also just for the longest time was seen as like the most progressive city in the United States. And now it's a hellscape. Mm-hmm. It's a hellscape where you basically have poop maps that rich make about where there's human feces across the city, because there's so many homeless people. There's so many people that are in need of social housing, that are in need of affordable housing, whatever that definition is.
Might mean in San Francisco.
And it's just a hellscape, right? And so it's really like this contrast with the San Francisco of the generation of love, or the summer of love, or whatever. I was going to say the Black Panthers, they're across the bay in Oakland, but there was still like all of these movements coming out of San Francisco, the Bay Area, and now it's just unlivable for most people, right?
Well, what do you think is the connecting point between them and us here in
The
Montreal?
connecting point is what San Francisco's policy was, right? The policy, and not San Francisco necessarily, San Jose, which is right next to San Francisco. We're in the United States. I was talking about this in the episode a little bit before, when I came on with Sarah from IJV, the idea that, you know, you have these jurisdictions, these small jurisdictions that are going to like lower tax dollars, tax like, you know, percentages or whatever tax rates to such an extent to like have companies come. So like San Jose, which is like not part of San Francisco, kind of did that, right? And so we attracted all of the Silicon Valley, all of this come in, you know, whatever. And Montreal's trying to do the same. And Quebec's trying to do the same. As if this is a model that actually works. So this is kind of where you thought this conversation was going to go. But I guess I'm happy that we got to this point in the conversation to connect some of the dots here. Because you have this reaction within that makes no sense within progressive and governments in general. We criticize the fact that there's a housing crisis. And we're like, oh my God, like there's a housing crisis. We've been talking about years. A lot of people in the community organization, et cetera, have been talking about it for years. Now it's come to fruition. And now all of a sudden they woke up. Just a few years ago, and even now, right, we're trying to court these big corporate entities to come that jack up the price of housing.
Gentrify neighborhoods.
That gentrify neighborhoods. And then we're talking about immigration. As if immigration is the problem when you have corporate Canada and corporate America wanting to build smart cities. Like, I don't know what a dumb city is, but anyways, smart cities to basically house their workers and house like their infrastructure. And so we're going back to the factory towns of like, you know, the end of the 19th century where, you know,
one company just owns the whole town.
Exactly. And utopian socialists would, you know, be like, oh, we need a company town because the workers are going to work, the factories are going to have housing and all of that. But at least there was housing at that point. These companies come, they don't build anything. They build the infrastructure that they need, which, by the way, is heavily supported by public money. And then all of the you know, the negative impact, they call it in capitalist lingo, negative externalities of these things are left on public entities, right? But then they pick up through tax dollars and through downsizing government and handing off these things to Amazon, or companies like Amazon. Basically, like they make even more profit. And so, like, just finishing on that, we have to ask ourselves today, you know, couldn't a public entity that actually was transparent, that actually, you know, had some form of giving back to the communities in which they exist, could exist, like could take Amazon's place? And it could. We have Post Canada. Right? We have a lot of like public entities that could take that place and could make communities more vibrant. And yet, instead of thinking about that, we have left-wing progressive governments that want to court basically the most evil corporations in the world to come under this veneer of progressivism, which is leftist entrepreneurialism, right? Which is this idea that the market can resolve the problems that the market creates. Right. Maybe there's a problem there, you know?
All right, yeah.
Thanks. You're coming to my TED Talk.
You preempted the thanks. Yeah, no, I think I really enjoy your points, because I think all this stuff about like trying to court like Amazon, trying to like make space for these for like a lot of Quebec. But I do think there's something interesting about a lot of Quebec, right? Because you have this group that's like this kind of corporation that's supposed to be like publicly owned, but then like the question is this operations in public interest, right? I think it's like, I would rather, of course, any money being made from like gambling in these casinos be going into public coffers. But then there's the thing of like, they do just kind of continue wherever these things of like gambling, they do kind of continue these things of like building this hotel, right? So like, I not to say that like any kind of like publicly owned version of Amazon, whether it's an extension of like the Canada Post, can't do that. I just wonder if it's going to be
just the corporate. I think the whole question about that is the corporate model that you put in place, right? Sure. So it's like the corporate model that is in place at, for example, Loto Quebec is a for-profit model. And it's basically the same, just with public money. So it's this idea of like, okay, you're a public company, so you have to do some pro bono work here and there, but you can still make as much profit as you want and screw over people and make profit. You're just public, but do some pro bono work, like greenwash this and that. Give loofah farms like a green garden in your hotel for millionaires, and it's fine. So it's the model of governance that I think stays capitalist. It's not the idea, like, that doesn't mean they're actually public. You know what I mean?
Sure. I understand the distinction you're trying to make.
The model has to be different. And so you have to empower, like, you could have elected folks, right? Like elected people to the board of governors, because most of the time you look at the CEO of Post Canada, like, was parachuted there to basically make Post Canada into either, like, there's two ways like Post Canada is going to go. Either it's going to be so inefficient and they're doing it on purpose that they're going to be like, oh, we can't deal with this, like, public, entity. The public sector doesn't know how to do anything anymore, so let's just privatize it.
Right.
Or make it into, like, just a normal company that still is owned by the government, but does everything like corporatees possibly.
Sure. I feel like there's Legault and Paul Saint Pierre Plamondon have talked about a certain a kind of Amazon for Quebec, like a nationalized, like a Amazon that's like specifically built for Quebec. Because I think he expressed some level of concern about like Amazon not having enough Quebec-made goods, and then you have these sort of like a little more like, I guess, Quebec national arguments about why you should have our own kind of Amazon here that's like for us, by us. I'm kind of curious how you connect your idea to theirs, if they are connected.
So what I understood through the panier bleu or whatever the hell they were talking about was that it was just going to be basically a website like Amazon where, you could buy Quebec products and they would, like, everybody would go there to buy Quebec products. And I don't know how, the infrastructure of getting those products to folks or to consumers was going to be. Amazon today is the biggest infrastructure, like logistical infrastructure in the world. They are capable of delivering stuff to you in 1 or 2 days, obviously because, there's huge levels of exploitation and stuff like that, but also because Amazon kind of comes in and fills something that most countries, except for the United States of America, have, which was a national public post system, right? Sure. Like corporation, right? Like Post Canada,
There's like robust supply chain network,
exactly,
robust
right?
logistics system.
Exactly. That logistics system, like, so if Amazon tomorrow morning decides to cut off the logistics system, or let's say even in a less like evil and whatever scenario, Amazon just collapses, bankruptcy, and all of these different logistical systems are cut off by different companies that don't work together because that's not how it works. Well, actually, there's an example of that when Ontario privatized hydro, right? And we saw a few years back there was this huge snowstorm in Ontario, and people were without electricity in some neighborhoods in Toronto and stuff like that. And so several people died because they were trying to like heat their homes with made like ovens and stuff like that.
Sure,
and like,
sure.
And in what was crazy in those reports coming out of Toronto was that one block was owned by one company and then the other block was owned by the other company. And that the people would show up to fix whatever problem it was, but they would only show up for their own company. They wouldn't fix the other side of the block. You know what I mean? Because that's what competition is. And they're not
incredibly, just by its nature, incredibly inefficient.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, we also have to ask ourselves strategically, and this is something obviously that, governments are not going to talk about because like you don't want to talk about that, but we've been offloading all of these strategical, like super important nexuses of like public power to corporations, and Amazon being one of them. And in most cases, this infrastructure that they take or that they appropriate is infrastructure that was paid by public money, right? That we just give and offload. And then, so it's like public money for the risk taking, but then it's private money for everything that's profits,
right?
So I don't think the PQ and the CAC actually have any idea about creating like an actual public entity that could compete with Amazon. That would, create like the basis for actually, helping small and medium companies in Quebec actually reach like Quebec consumers through public, and so everybody could be a shareholder of a public entity, whatever, But I don't think they actually think about that. I think they think of a very baseline, basically, let's build a website and then let's figure it out. You know what I mean? And as long as it's in French and it's a website, like they would have no problem creating the Amazon version in French of Amazon, but that's not the model we want,
Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, I wanted to end on this quote by Paris Marx, the host of the Tech Won't Save Us podcast. I thought this was kind of a great podcast. Friend of the show. I've never met him, but he's sort of at the edge of our media network. Maybe he'll see this.
You wish.
Anyways, I feel like this whole discussion we're having about these courting these kind of technocratic companies, courting these kinds of like big players that we assume have the sort of like know-how or expertise in solving the problems we face to our day-to-day. I feel like this quote kind of speaks to that a little bit, where Paris Marx in this interview with Canadian Dimension.
Yeah, he had to plug that, right?
He says...
Do you write for Canadian Dimension?
He says, improving the world is a political project, not a technological one. So the question is, will our representatives see things that way? Thank you very much, Niall Clapham Riccardo, for coming onto the show, sharing some of your perspectives on politics in the city, politics federally, provincially, given your experiences and knowledge in that. I hope to have you again on the show if this episode isn't just a total bomb.
And if people do not like hold me on every word that I said in this episode, just know that, there's a disclaimer. I was just doing this for Kalden and nothing.
You can't say that after the episode's done.
That's true. Okay. Well, it's done. It's done now. I have to live with it.
We'll be right back with Hello Good Bylines with not Savanna Craig this time. What the? Stay tuned. It'll be like 10, 15 minutes. Go get some snacks, get some air. I'll see you soon. Welcome back to Metropolis. I'm your host, Kalden. Today, our segment, Hello Good Bylines. But you'll see, next to me is not Savanna Craig like usual. Next to me today is Neha Chollangi.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Kalden.
Thanks for coming on. I actually don't have any water. Can I have some of your water?
Yeah, of course. Is that enough?
No, but that's fine.
Okay, great. We share here at CUTV.
That's right. We share...
Hydration.
Hydration?
Water.
Water, yeah. I was going to say something. Yeah. And knowledge. We're here as journalists sharing our perspectives on the world of Montreal.
Indeed.
The metropolis of Quebec. I'm talking like this to try to...
Did you have a stroke during the break?
You guys smell... Does the producer smell burnt toast? No, but in all seriousness, Neha, thank you for coming on to this episode. I feel like I've had to... I've been looking forward to your segments. What do you have for us today?
Today, I would love to talk about Chinatown in Montreal and the fact that it has historical heritage designation, what exactly that means, and what it provides the neighborhood and what it doesn't quite provide the neighborhood yet. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it today.
Have you gone to Chinatown a few times?
I have a few times, yes.
There's some good food there. Lanzhou noodles,
yes.
Incredible.
Yeah, I have a lot of places that I would like to go to eat food there, but every time I do go there, I feel at home. It's nice.
Nice, terrific. Yeah. Well, so you tell me a little more about this historical designation. What does that mean? Yeah,
so basically, this has been kind of in the works for quite a while. Like advocates of Chinatown in Montreal have been working towards getting this historical designation for years, and that happened in January 2022. The province has given the neighborhood historical designation, and recently the city has as well. So basically, to break it down, what that means is when the province gave the neighborhood a historical designation, they had protected a core part of Chinatown, and protected two specific buildings, which was the Wings Noodle Factory, and also the S. Davis and Sons factory building.
Interesting.
And when the city gave historical designation, that kind of just expanded what the protection was. So it included all of Chinatown, which includes residential areas as well. And they also modified the urban plan so that the zoning bylaws made it so that you can't build and have buildings over a certain height.
Oh, I guess that's sort of
It's about like 8 to 10 stories.
I guess that disincentivizes potential developers and people who want to, let's say, buy up some of those properties to build like big condos and big hotels. It disincentivizes them from doing that because there's this kind of a permit limit on that.
Exactly, and yeah, also they have to request the city if they can make any modifications because those sites and those buildings are protected now, which is a huge win. Of course, because it protects that neighborhood, it protects those buildings. But yeah, it doesn't protect the intangible parts of the neighborhood.
Sure.
I do have a video actually that kind of gets into the news of the historical designation, so we can watch that.
We love videos here.
We do.
I think it's a great way to highlight the contribution of the Chinese communities, especially the first Chinese immigrants in Canada.
Montreal's Chinatown has officially been recognized as the city's first neighborhood designated as a heritage site. The push for this came from community concerns about the impact that real estate pressure could have on Chinatown and the desire to protect the heritage identity and characteristics of the attractions and cultural practices.
Designating as Chinatown as a historical site, I think it will it creates a lot of opportunities in terms of educational and also interpretation of the history of Chinatown.
Montreal's Chinatown began to develop in the 1890s and today has many restaurants, markets, grocery stores, health services, and cultural organizations. Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante says this new status was part of a global strategy to promote the sector's history and recognize the contribution of the Asian community.
I think more and more school and more people come here, so the Chinatown will have a good business.
I'm just hoping that the designation of Chinatown Heritage Site is more than just like for the aesthetics, and it's more than just for Chinatown as being a tourist attraction.
Last year, the Quebec government designated Chinatown as a provincial heritage site, protecting 9 buildings from major alterations or demolition. With the recent municipal declaration, the hope from many in Montreal's Chinatown community is that both Montrealers and tourists will learn more about their history.
We had the head tax by the Canadian government, and also in 1923 there was the Chinese Exclusion Act that really separate families to able to come to China, and also later there was also a tax for the laundromats owned by Chinese.
We should add it in the curriculum of schools so that they know that it happened. At one point in Montreal and Quebec, there was the exclusionary laws that banned Chinese immigration for many years. So I think it's not something that we can just forget about.
I think in this case, it is definitely a first step to many that the city at least recognizes the Chinatown as a heritage site. Now I would like to see this information being propagated and being basically educated everywhere as well.
In Montreal, Gareth Maddock-Jones, City News.
Nice little clip there from City News. Garrett Maddock-Jones talking about the heritage protections that are now in force in Chinatown, Montreal's Chinatown, and you also had some few community members talking about, what they're looking forward to from these policy resolutions, as well as some concerns. I believe the young woman from the Chinatown Youth Organization was concerned about it being something only for aesthetic purposes, which is, I think, a totally valid concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what she said there, and yeah, because I think that echoes a concern that many advocates do have, that this is sort of a move that, for lack of a better word, fossilizes that neighborhood, mummifies it, without actually helping the communities that live there, you know? And actually the city did say as well, like, the historical designation is to help out the residents, but also tourists. And as we know, like, the neighborhood has been a tourist attraction, and the city has been promoting it as a tourist attraction since the 80s. So I think the need to shift what they're doing for the residents is quite important.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe you have a story from a resident for us.
Yeah, actually, so this person isn't a resident, but they did grow up in Montreal's Chinatown, and I talked to them for an article I wrote a little while ago, which was about community-led activism that was happening in Chinatown to do the work that has been accomplished of getting historical designation and protecting Chinatown. So I spoke to Sandy Yep, who is someone that is an educator in Toronto now, actually. But basically what happened with Sandy, this was back in 2021. Sandy saw an article in the Montreal Gazette, and back then these two condo developers were looking to tear down the Wings Noodle factory building and a couple of other buildings in that block to build condos, as they do. And there was a huge outcry over that, honestly. And when Sandy saw it, he reacted with a lot of anxiety and concern. But what struck him was, in the pictures of the Montreal Gazette, he saw a picture of a backyard. And he recognized that backyard because he grew up in that house. And it was right next to the Wings Noodle factory. And it was his grandfather's house that went back to 1890s when his grandfather first came to Montreal. And so that house has been in his family for 4 generations. And the idea of that being torn apart, having condos built, was a very personal attack for him, really. One of the things he said that I wanted to quote was, "I witnessed the destruction, demolition, and dismantling of our Chinatown. The fact is that we have been here since 1897, at least my grandfather, and nobody understands that this story is literally about our erasure." Which I thought was quite powerful, because I think the way that we talk about these stories and look at it as this collective history, but I think there's a lot of individual histories that are impacted when we talk about Chinatown as well, which I think is interesting. Like, that's a huge moment for someone to see
course.
their grandfathers and their childhood home being potentially demolished. But basically, Sandy went to the Chinatown Working Group, who was a huge part in getting residents, getting municipal city councilors and all of these folks together to essentially have the historical designation to protect these buildings. And so I think what I'm trying to get back to is, like, this historical designation for stories like this to protect these physical notes of this neighborhood is super important. And yeah.
Yeah, no, it's incredible to hear that it's 4 generations of his family. Because I mean, honestly, it's like sometimes, like, I think even myself, I forget. Not recently, but like I feel like growing up, I was kind of like amazed at how long the Chinese community here has been here. Because my family came here in like the 70s. I remember it was during a history class in high school where my history teacher was talking about like the waves of like immigration here in like Canada and Montreal, and it's like Chinese community here in Canada, like it's like British Columbia, the Chinese community came at the same time as the British. Here in Montreal, they're like one of the oldest. Like if you think of like Saint Laurent as like this kind of like tree ring, and if you think of like the old port as like the start of that, you see the Chinatown is like right there after the old port, right? It's like you have the Basilica, and then from the Basilica, you can start to see Chinatown, right? And it's these communities that came here from, most of them are from the southern Guangdong province in China. They came here after the area was going through like incredible, like very turbulent times, lots of violence, lots of like little small like revolts, famine as well. And so there, a lot of them sought refuge in foreign places like Canada and the U.S. And then you have one of the interviewees talking before about sort of like this legacy of the kind of arms that came to greet them, and it's like they came here for like money, for some security, and then instead they were met with like very kind of like xenophobic kind of like policies set out by like the Canadian government. participation from like Quebec. Like I mean, all levels of like government here kind of sort of worked hand in hand to try and exclude Chinese people from society. He mentioned the Chinese head tax, which made it so a lot of the Chinese men here in Canada, most of them were men, of course, working in like the railroads or like other kind of like laundromats or restaurants. It made it so their families couldn't get here. I think it's something like 80% of the Chinese population in like the I think it was before 1940 had most of their families back in China, and they wanted to bring them over, of course, but then they couldn't because of this very expensive head tax. And then that's just one of the policies, right? That's like said about like excluding the Chinese population here from society. I think Montreal's Chinatown is especially notable because Quebec used to have its own Chinatown, which is a very small one, but it was demolished to make room for this auto route. And even you have this sort of thing where you had administrations here using development as a sort of way to either like erase parts of a neighborhood. Like I mean, the Ville-Marie Expressway, they demolished part of Low Burgundy, which is predominantly black neighborhoods where jazz musician Oscar Peterson grew up. That's one of the examples. And even if you're in like Chinatown, Montreal, you'll notice like on like I believe it's on René Lévesque, you'll see like these big like Government of Canada buildings, and they sort of set those up. They bought the land around Chinatown and built these big government buildings there to try to like contain the community, And I spoke to a representative from the GIA Foundation. She was telling me that because I was kind of like wondering, I was like, did you guys ever want like an apology from the government for that? They're like, the community here has never really cared about that too much. I think they care more about like getting these kind of historic heritage designations, and of course, right, because you had a few years ago. I mean, like not a few years ago, but you have this Chinatown, very central neighborhood, urban neighborhood, right next to downtown, right next to the old port, sort of in a kind of a nice location, right? And you're starting to have developers who are interested in moving in. Anyways, this is just all short thing to say. Reflecting on Sandy's talking about how long his family has been here, and I guess it's something that's, I think, to me incredible always to hear about these very long family histories of people who are here. And then the efforts they're doing to try to maintain those histories and try to make sure that they're not erased, as Sandy is concerned about.
Yeah, it's such a rich history. Did you? I'm just curious, but did you learn about the Chinese history in Montreal and Canada when you were in school?
No, of course not.
No.
No. I learned that on my own. I can't remember what it was. I think I was just on one of those, like, you ever go on like a Wikipedia binge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Wikipedia
I love
holes.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a few nights I was just like, Chinese people in Canada. And I was like,
just a casual Friday night for Kalden.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good book called Alien Capital by Eco Day. It's a little kind of academic, but there's a lot of interesting things that I think she explores that I think remain underexplored about kind of Chinese and Asian histories in Canada. Because I remember, I think, what was I looking up? I was looking up about like certain kind of xenophobic histories in Canada. Like maybe not xenophobic. Specifically, this one is like sort of like anti-Japanese sentiment.
Yeah,
but it's
I was
like,
gonna ask. Yeah.
It's about the internment camps we had for
Yes,
like Japanese Canadians, right? They were here for a while, and then during World War II, people were like, well, obviously these Japanese people are going to be loyal to Japan, and so they sort of like rounded them up. They put them in like trains and like kind of like internment housing right near the Pacific Rail grounds. Do you know? It's where the PNE is. The Pacific.
There's so many of those in BC, actually. Yeah. I remember passing by a bunch of them. They're like museums now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good. It's good that that kind of memory is being exercised. But I think we still have. I mean, I think you're going to mention this, but there's still that kind of history of not even the history, but there's still that kind of anti-Asian kind of sentiment, which is still unfortunately alive.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is really unfortunate that we don't have, like, I think. One of the people that we saw in the videos from the Chinatown youth movement talked about this. It should be taught in schools. Yeah. And I think I remember being taught about, we had maybe one page of a handout or something and like talked about it for an hour and brushed past it really quickly. But it is, I think it's a shame that we don't, because I do wonder how much it contributes to the fact that we see like how we see these neighborhoods and these communities in our collective consciousness when we have such a void in the history and memory of how long they've been here, how deep their history is on this land.
And it's funny because it's not like, it's, of course it's on the land, but it's also in the language as well. Here in Quebec, there's lots of things that have to do with like Chien, the Chinois. There's like, I remember it's always interesting talking to people about how they relate to these kinds of things. It's like Lashin, the neighborhood here, called that because I think it was a group of like early settlers there, sort of like used that as their home base, and then they would like every now and then they would try to these excursions out east through like the Canadian wilderness to try and find China, and then they came back, and of course they did not find China.
Shocking.
And people were like, "Hey, est-ce que t'as trouvé la Chine? Like, did you find like China yet?" And then that's how the neighborhood got named. Because, like, and which is like to me, I'm like, that's crazy. That's absolutely wild. And even things like pâté chinois, like shepherd's pie, or like shadow puppets are called something like. I forgot the word in French, but it also evokes this like image of China, which is I find so interesting. That book I mentioned before talks about how Van Horn, the OG that the overpass is named after, he was a big lover of like Asian stuff, but like in a way that's like sort of like fetishistic. Like if you go to the Montreal Fine Arts Museum, you see a lot of like old kind of like Asian artifacts of like kind of carriages or like dresses, samurai stuff, and a lot of those were his because he was like a old school Japanophile.
Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of icky a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In Eco Day's book Alien Capital, she has this a little drawing that he did of like a Chinese guy.
Oh God!
And he's like, it's just like, I mean, it's like it seems like it comes from some kind of weird like fetishistic I don't know, like, I don't know, for him it was like a hobby, I guess, which is like weird. He's just like, try my little Asian guy in his book.
He would like love anime. If
Oh
he
yeah,
lived today.
absolutely, yeah. He would love if
He'd
he was
go to
still around.
Comic-Con.
Oh yeah,
all dressed up.
absolutely. He'd love boba. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. What else do you have for us, Neha, about the Chinatown here in Montreal?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to like jump ahead and talk about what is sort of happening today and like the last couple of years and stuff.
Bring us back to the present.
I'm bringing you back. So there's been a lot of fires, metaphorical fires.
I don't want to be in the president anymore.
Metaphorical fires, but like when we're talking about the amenities that are not there in the neighborhood, if we go back to 2018 and 2019, a lot of stuff happened. So, for example, 2018, the Chinese community center shut down. 2019, the YMCA shut down, both due to escalating rent prices. Like both of which are like really important pillars of a neighborhood, of communities, you know. And just a couple months ago in October, actually, the city was temporarily closing a homeless shelter in the neighborhood. And this homeless shelter had like 65 beds. And what they did was, well, they were getting a lot of complaints from people in the surrounding areas saying there was, you know, a lot of crime and rowdy behavior happening because of the homeless population. And so they shut it down temporarily and moved it to Verdun, which is 10 kilometers away.
Not near Chinatown at all.
Not near Chinatown at all. So these people that were living in Chinatown, that were experiencing homelessness, that were using this homeless shelter, were now expected to go somewhere that was 10 kilometers away.
Like, I don't know where you can get good dim sum in Verdun, honestly.
No, yeah, like, what's the point?
Yeah. I do think there's you say metaphorical fires. There was actually like a big fire that happened in Chinatown.
That's right. Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the building, but this is like it opened in like late 1800s. This is like one of the first theaters, cinemas in North America. And a few years ago, it like burned down. And I remember like my concern was like anytime these old like historic buildings burn down, I'm always like, oh great, like. You can't really give like a protected heritage status to anything that's burnt down, and usually likely what's going to come up is going to be a condo. So so I will say, of course, there's these metaphorical fires of kind of pillars of a community, like a community center or YMCA shutting down, but there was also sometimes real fires.
Yeah, unfortunate. Yeah, you don't remember what building that was, huh?
I do not. That's not good journalism of me.
I actually have a video.
Look it up yourself.
I actually have a video about some folks talking about the homeless shelter, so we can take a look at that.
We love videos.
We do.
We are here now to show that we didn't agree about this closing of the shelter.
A group of Montrealers called Chinatown Youth is speaking out after the closure of the homeless shelter inside the complex Guy Favreau here in Chinatown. They are asking that more resources be directed toward housing, mental health and drug-related overdoses in Montreal, now that they say many here in the homeless community have to find other shelter downtown, rendering them more vulnerable.
We are asking for more shelters in downtown, more resources in downtown, and not allocated in Verdun, which is like 30, 40 minutes from here.
A new temporary shelter opened in Verdun on Friday, about 10 kilometers from the former Chinatown shelter. Although shuttle buses paid by the city are in service to transport those in need to available resources, there are questions about how many will actually use this service and how many remain in the downtown Chinatown area.
They think also that the resources that they have is located in downtown. It's not in Verdun. It's not at the outskirts of the downtown Montreal.
These calls for action from Chinatown youth come after the homeless shelter in Chinatown was closed following complaints from local businesses and residents who said that they had been the target of violence and criminal acts related to drug consumption and homelessness.
For the people living in Chinatown, it's good for them to live in here because they cause a lot of problems.
I don't think it's a good thing because many people need that.
I don't think they're gonna leave, right? They got a right to leave or they got a right to stay. Like you see the camping there. Maybe the camping gonna be bigger. Who knows?
We're talking about the safety of all Chinatown community, and we believe that the unhoused peoples are also part of the Chinatown community.
In a statement, the City of Montreal says that some 20 people from the Complexe Guy Favreau have been relocated and that the others have received a list of housing resources throughout Montreal. Chinatown Youth, which represents some 30 young people living in the neighbourhood, says that the insecurity concerns of the elderly residents of Chinatown must be treated with seriousness, but that the closure of the homeless shelter only makes issues faced by this population even worse.
I think it's good to see that for the first time the Chinatown community is embodied by multiple people, and we are a diversity of people who cares about the social issues in Chinatown. So we believe that's the beginning of a big mobilization of Chinatown and a different one.
In Montreal, Gareth Maddock-Jones, City News.
Is Garrett their Chinatown correspondent?
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, he's like on top of it, like
He's
in the same
always there.
corner.
Yeah, that's his corner. His camera is kind of shaky though. I don't know if our listeners, they don't see that, but his camera's
He's
sort of.
just terrified of the lack of homeless shelters.
This is truly an upstanding citizen who's concerned about the social services in that part of town. Really incredible to see this youth group, Chinatown Youth, advocate for unhoused people and also claim them to be part of the community, right? Because I feel like sometimes community groups can be a little. I guess they can kind of toe the line between being a community group and being sort of almost like a homeowners association that's kind of concerned about the image of a neighborhood.
Right.
But I think this group doesn't seem to kind of fall into that designation at all. It seems like they're advocating for unhoused people. They recognize them as part of the community, but they also recognize the concerns of the more elderly people in the neighborhood who are worried about security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do like how she said, they're part of this community, and another resident said that they deserve to live here. They deserve to stay downtown just like anyone else. So, I kind of brought that point up because I think it's important to look at the amenities that are available in those neighborhoods that make it actually livable for people. So like homeless shelters, like those kinds of things that we talked about, the community center, homeless shelter,
the YMCA
shutting down. But there's other things that never existed actually, which came up when I was talking to Parker Ma, who's part of the GF Foundation. And he said, things like senior centers, parks, green spaces, affordable housing complex, those sorts of things never existed to begin with, and so those are important things to keep in mind when we're thinking about what does it mean to revitalize Chinatown, make it a vibrant community. Like, who are we making it a vibrant community for?
Right. Is it for the residents there, or is it perhaps for tourists who don't really like seeing homeless people around?
Yeah, exactly.
The tourist spots.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think how long has the neighborhood been a sort of tourist destination?
I think it's been marketed as a tourist destination for quite a long time, probably since the 80s.
Yeah.
But I think that's still something the city I feel like has in mind when they're thinking about Chinatown and the image of it and like the collective way that we think about it. But a lot of community-based groups, I think, are recognizing that and trying to push away from it.
Push away from what exactly?
From the idea that this neighborhood is just a tourist destination.
Right, of course.
That people actually still live there. And these people deserve to have the amenities that every other neighborhood in Montreal has.
They don't want to live in a museum that's sort of like hermetically sealed and like preserved. They want to be able to live in something that's like a thriving community that has like, let's say, the amenities and institutions you're mentioning, right? Like seniors' homes, clinics, a homeless shelter as well, or even like a gym to go to.
Yeah, like gathering spaces for communities, and this is not really unique to Montreal's Chinatown. I mean, it's happening to Chinatowns all over Canada, all over North America. And there's a lot of really cool community-based action that's happening inside of this stuff. Like there's, obviously we have the GF Foundation, which I'll kind of come back and talk about. But for example, T-Base in Toronto is a really cool example.
T-Base.
TEA base.
BASE. In case our listeners didn't know.
Yes, exactly. They don't exist as a physical space anymore, but they still are a collective group that work on a lot of stuff, and honestly have been trying to get collective land agreements as well, so that the community can own the space that they're living in.
Oh, a land trust. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. One of the things that they did as well, which I thought was great a couple of years ago, was so when real estate developers are putting up signs, they're putting up these signs in English. And a lot of residents, senior residents specifically, will not be able to read those signs. And so they don't know what's happening. So they were translating these signs to Mandarin or Cantonese. But, it's things like that, community groups that understand who's living there, understand the needs of the people that are living there, and are doing things specifically for that. Those things are important. The city is not thinking of those things.
No, of course. These developers aren't really thinking about those things. They're just trying to do something quick. They're like, all right, whatever, sign in English.
Exactly.
We don't really care about the residents here, right?
Exactly. So that was really great. They also have just like a community art space. They host mahjong nights on Mondays.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Road trip.
Yeah. But I think a huge part of their mission is about showing that this space is not just a historical artifact. We're a living culture. We have things that are going on every day. We're here to teach you and bring you into our spaces. So T-Base is really cool. Aya Collective in Edmonton also does really great stuff. They have like wellness workshops, bringing back traditional Chinese medicine and how to take care of our community and bring back health practices, things like that. GF Foundation here in Montreal has been doing fantastic things. Like I think I mentioned before, it used to be, it was kind of affiliated with
Chinatown Working Group.
Thank you, Chinatown Working Group.
I got you.
That dissolved into GF Foundation and Chinatown Roundtable. But yeah, GF Foundation has a lot of great partnerships with other community groups. They've been advocating to protect the neighborhood from gentrification for a super long time. They host art exhibits and are just like a great learning space to keep this neighborhood alive and well.
Incredible things to see. Incredible to see these kinds of things being advocated for. Like I remember when I hear about GIF Foundation, Chinatown Working Group, I was kind of like relieved that there's these kind of community organizations kind of fighting for that. I think it's also interesting that this is a thought I had that the Chinatown Montreal is the first one to receive this kind of historic status. And I'm kind of wondering, I'm like, I wonder if other neighborhoods are going to be able to get that kind of status, or what is it about the Chinatown community groups that are able to how are they able to mobilize so quickly, efficiently with kind of city officials on this kind of issue, right? Because I think about if I think about another let's say ethnic neighborhood in Montreal that did not have these sort of protections, I think about Griffintown, right? This old Irish working class neighborhood. Now it's just completely leveled. There's a few of the old factories there, but the initial Irish population there are just gone, right? They've kind of I mean maybe that's because they're able to find other English or Catholic kind of communities around Montreal that they didn't really feel like they had to have this kind of physical space, where maybe perhaps the Chinese community did not feel like they had that kind of other options. So maybe that could be why they're sticking together. It'd be interesting to see what other neighborhoods try to get this status, if any, and then how the other neighborhoods kind of go about it. Because this is a cool thing to see. It's a cool thing to see this kind of community protections, neighborhood protections being put in place against gentrification.
Yeah, I think another thing that the municipal designation is supposed to be helping towards is education and promoting cultural education of the neighborhood as well. So they haven't really come out and said exactly what that means or how much money would be going into things like that. But I think funneling that funding towards community organizations like this is ideal, like to put it in the hands of the folks that are living there and are working there and knowing what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Neha, for bringing this story to us.
Yeah.
And, I guess,
Thank you.
Time to get some noodles in Chinatown, maybe. I was supposed to go to Chinatown this weekend. I didn't.
Oh, I
I
hope
should
you
go
go
back.
Yeah. With
Maybe
new eyes.
New eyes, yeah.
New appreciation
Oh yeah,
for these
I'm
historical buildings.
ordering some duck, some pork belly now. I'll be like, oh my God, I'm part of history. Thank you very much, everyone. That's our show for today, for this week, actually, because we're a weekly show.
Be back here tomorrow.
My little self edit there. Thank you again to Neha. Thank you to the crew, everyone sort of behind the camera that the audience can't see. Takes a lot of hands to get this show running, and I'm very appreciative of everyone who's helped out on the show, and also appreciative of you, the listener. Thank you so much for the. I'm thanking the listeners.
Please
Thank you for
continue.
listening. Take care of yourselves. Happy Lunar New Year. If you celebrate, I will be celebrating the Lunar New Year. As I say, Lunar New Year, Lunar New Me. I'll see you next week, folks. Take care.